Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to another edition of Intuitive Angling, and thanks for stopping by and checking the video out. It's always much appreciated. And guys, today we're going to be having a conversation about David Fritts announcing his retirement last week and what that means. And we're going to also talk about the bigger picture about why these OG pros are starting to retire now all of a sudden, along with other people that are getting out of the sport. Because I've noticed that not just on the national circuit amongst, guys like Larry Nixon last week and David Fritz and Jay Ellis, but also on more regional circuits. So we're going to get into that. And also, guys, just a huge thank you, a big thank you to everybody out there that's been using and bookmarking my new tackle warehouse link. If you guys are interested in purchasing tackle, or if you need any tackle and you want to support the channel, if you use the link that I put in the description, that's a good way to support the channel. And also, Tackle Warehouse has Black Friday sale all through November and December, and I'll put my link in there for that too in the description if you want to check that out. So appreciate it. Okay, guys, if you missed it, David Fritts announced his retirement from the Elite Series last week, along with Larry Nixon, along with Jay Ellis last year. Sort of been a rash of the OG pros retiring. Now, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about David Fritts, and then I want to get into the bigger picture why this is happening. Now, a lot of people have maybe forgotten about David Fritts, especially if you haven't been around the sport for like the last 15 years. Guys, David Fritts is a freaking hammer, and he is the pioneer. All you live scoping dudes out there, you offshore guru type guys, David Fritts is the grandfather of the offshore, deep water fishing. I want to get into that a little bit. If you weren't around back in the 1990s, you had no idea how far ahead of the game he was. He wasn't even on the same planet as anybody else. So Fritz announced his retirement last week after several, really difficult seasons on the Elite Series circuit. Now, before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Fritz. I sort of want to give a little tribute here. David Fritts was the master of offshore fishing. He dominated the sport in the early 90s. Bassmaster Classic champion, won Angler of the Years. He was the dude out there that with a flasher and knowing how to triangulate that would find these offshore schools of fish that nobody even knew existed out there. He didn't even know. He would just basically go out there and crank hard structure, drop-offs and stumps and that type of stuff. He didn't really know what was out there, but he found the drop-offs and he found, high spots and stuff like that. This was back before anybody did it. And he dominated the sport with a crankbait. It was just, there was no equal to him. And if you had a tournament in the summer or the late fall, David Fritts would dominate that tournament. And he was such a imposing figure from the early to mid 90s that nobody even could come close with him. There wasn't anybody out there that could come close to him. So from that standpoint, David Fritts is a true icon in the sport, and he does not get the notoriety that he definitely deserves from the newer generation of anglers out there. Now, given that, let's have a little conversation about why these OGs like Fritz and Nixon and all of them are dropping out. I'm not speaking for these guys, so this is speculation on my point, but the speculation I feel that is I think there's the legitimacy to it. I think a lot of these guys like Fritz, Nixon, all those type of guys are just basically saying, F it, I do not want any part of trying to compete with these forward-facing Sonar live scopers, because they cannot keep with it. That's why you have seen the hammers in the sport over the past 5 years. I don't care if they're 50 years old or 75 years old, they have basically been flushed down the toilet, ever since forward-facing Sonar came out. They can't keep up with it. And it's frustrating because you take somebody like Fritz, that he has forgotten more about bass fishing than any live scoper that's dominating tournaments today knows about bass fishing. The amount of knowledge and skill and wisdom that these guys have on bass fishing it's like the difference between, I would put like a live scoper in preschool, and I would put somebody like David Fritts or Larry Nixon in the PhD program at Harvard University or something like that. There's no comparison with that. So from that standpoint, when you're somebody like David Fritts or Larry Nixon or Jay Ellis or whoever out there, and again, this is my speculation, I'm not speaking for these guys, It's almost like you say, what am I even doing out here? It's like I have got all these skills that has taken me 50 years to acquire, and they're worthless now. Everything that I know about bass fishing, these guys are saying, in my opinion, doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference that, David Fritz is the master of triangulation and offshore structure fishing when he can't utilize that in today's world of live scoping, video gaming, which is not fishing. And I completely get it, and I completely understand the frustration with that. And it's bleeding on down to below that. It's like, I think that's a big reason that you see this sour attitude about a lot of people are having towards tournament fishing, is they just don't want to keep up with it. They can't keep up with it. They don't want to keep up with it. It's just not fun anymore. It's not fishing anymore. And it's just another aspect. If you didn't have one more reason not to like live scope and forward facing sonar, the fact that it's pushing these OG pros out of the sport is enough reason for that. Now, a lot of people say, okay, well, why don't they just adapt and learn and that type of stuff? Why don't they adapt to the technology? It's not that easy, guys. It's like when you have spent, let's say, for example, you take Rick Clunn, for example. Rick Clunn is probably one of the top square bill crankbait masters in the world. He understands square bill crankbait fishing better than probably anybody out there. That's taken him decades and decades and decades and thousands of hours on the water to master. Most people just don't have the time to do that with live scope. They don't have the time to dedicate and put towards completely dropping everything they know about fishing and their worldview on fishing and transforming and trying to compete with people that has been their worldview and their approach to fishing since they started. That doesn't require the time element with that. It requires a different understanding of how that technology works. Now, let me use a prime example. Let's use algebra, for example, in high school. If you guys can remember back in high school, the algebra class, for some people, algebra was like super easy, and other people like me, it was next to impossible. It didn't matter how hard I worked at it, how many questions I asked, whatever, I just could not comprehend algebra like a lot of different people out there. And that's the same way when you talk about somebody trying to comprehend and utilize the technology of today in fishing, the live scope technology, into their game plan of fishing. A lot of people just can't do it. They don't want to do it. And as a result, you see what we've got now. And we've talked about this before. We've rehashed this 6,000 times, so I don't want to get into all my past video, viewpoints on it. But the point of the matter is, guys, is you're going to continually see the stars of the sport, the older guys, constantly begin dropping out. You're going to see them become less and less a factor. And here's my prediction on it. And I've always said this. Once an angler gets in their 40s, something like that, you're going to start seeing more and more and more of those 40, 50, 60-year-old type anglers out there, the pros, that just simply are at the bottom of the standings every year. If you look right now, if you look at the Elite Series, MLF, whatever, and you look at the people that are at the bottom of the standings, most all of them are in their 50s and 60s. And guys, this is a complete departure, because back in the 90s, like in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a bunch of guys at the top of their game all the time in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, simply because they were capitalizing on their experience, and their experience built and built and built over the years. And then once live scope comes around, that experience that they've accumulated that took them decades to do it is worthless. It's a worthless piece of knowledge. It's sort of the same thing I was sponsored by Fujifilm, guys, for years. Fujifilm made film. They made disposable cameras, that type of stuff. And when the cell phone came out and digital cameras came out, Fujifilm went down the tubes because nobody needed to buy film anymore. It's sort of the same thing. It's like, why, if you're a live scoper and you've committed your life to live scope, why do you need to know about seasonal patterns? Why do you need to know about fishing a square bill crankbait on a laydown? Why do you need to know how to flip a jig in flooded bushes? You don't need to know anything about bass fishing as long as you can turn that unit on and you've got power to your unit and you've got some type of current flow in your unit. As long as you can turn that unit on, that's all you need. You don't need to know anything else about bass fishing. So anyway, off the point a little bit, but I just wanted to bring up the point. David Fritts, another one, retiring. I hate to see it. Like I said, these guys that I just wish in bass fishing we could have a history course that, like, before you were allowed to fish a Bassmaster tournament or an MLF tournament, you had to go through a history course to gain an appreciation for guys like Larry Nixon and guys like David Fritz that came before us out there, because we don't ever want to forget that those guys paved the way for everybody the way they have it now. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll talk later. See you.